turn his head, and the ticket collector had yawned as he moved away from the barrier. Each one of these incidents, trifling though they were in themselves, had been like pinpricks of humiliation to the little man whose geniality had been almost a byword. The worst trial of all, however, arrived when Jacob entered the carriage in which he had been accustomed for 6 days out of 7 to make his journey to the city. As usual, it was occupied by 2 men, strangers to him commercially, but with whom he had developed a very pleasant acquaintance. Mr. Stephen Pedlar, the well-known accountant to the trade in which Jacob was interested. Mr. Lionel Groome, whose life was spent in a strenuous endeavor to combine the 2 avocations of a man of fashion and liquid glue manufacturer, and Mr. Edward Bultiwell, of Bultiwell and Sons, Bermondsey, his former condescending patron and occasional host, and now, alas, his largest creditor. The porter being for the first time unaccountably absent, Jacob was compelled to open the door for himself, thereby rendering his nervous entrance more self-conscious than ever. He found himself confronted and encircled by a solid wall of newspapers, stumbled over an outstretched foot, relapsed into the vacant place, and looked helplessly around him. A kind word just then might not have helped the lump in Jacob's throat, but it would certainly have brought a fortune in later life to anyone who had uttered it. "Good morning, gentlemen," the newcomer ventured. There was a muttered response from either side of him, none from the august figure in the opposite corner. Jacob fingered with tentative wistfulness the very choice rose which he was wearing in his buttonhole. Perhaps he ought not to have plucked and worn it. Perhaps it ought not to have opened its soft sweet petals for an owner who was dwelling in the valley of impecunious disgrace. Perhaps he ought to have ended there and then the good-natured rivalry of years, and offered the cherished blossom to his silent creditor in the corner, in place of the very inferior specimen which adorned the lapel of the great man's coat. Even in that moment of humiliation, Jacob felt a little thrill of triumph at the thought of Mr. Bultiwell's 3 gardeners. It took more than gardeners to grow such a rose as he was wearing. He liked to fancy that it took personal care, personal sympathy, personal love. The sweetest and rarest flowers must have their special atmosphere. Quite suddenly, Mr. Edward Bultiwell laid down his Times and glared across at Jacob. He was a large man with an ugly red face, a neck which hung over his collar in rolls, and a resonant voice. Directly he began to speak, Jacob began to shiver. "Pratt," he said, "am I to understand that the greeting which you offered to the occupants of this carriage when you entered was intended to include me?" I certainly meant it to," was the tremulous reply. "Then let me beg that such a liberty be not repeated," Mr. Bultiwell continued brutally. "I look upon a man who has compounded with his creditors as a person temporarily, at any rate, outside the pale of converse with his fellows on equal terms. I look upon your presence in the first-class carriage, wearing a floral adornment," Mr. Bultiwell added, with a jealous glance at the very beautiful rose, "which is, to say the least of it, conspicuous as an impertinence to those who have had the misfortune to suffer from your insolvency." The healthy color faded from Jacob's cheeks. He had the air of one stricken by a lash, dazed for the moment and bewildered. "My rose cost me nothing," he faltered, "and my season ticket doesn't expire till next month. I must go up to the city. My help is needed with the books." Mr. Bultiwell shook his paper preparatory to disappearing behind it. "Your presence here may be considered a matter of taste," he fired off as a parting shot. "I call it damned bad taste." Mr. Jacob Pratt sat like a hurt thing till the train stopped at the next station. Then he stumbled out onto the platform and making his way through an unaccountable mist, he climbed somehow or other into a third-class carriage. Richard Dauncey, the melancholy man who lived in the cottage opposite to his, looked up at the newcomer's entrance, and, for the first time within his recollection, Jacob saw him smile. "Good morning, Mr. Pratt," the former said, with a strenuous attempt at cordiality. "If you'll excuse me..."